Hey, what's up, comrades? Today I wanted to provide some commentary and analysis on the topic of service work and productive versus unproductive labor. And what better place and time to do this than the here and the now in the form of a 10-minute diss track. A couple days ago, Jackson Hinkle made a tweet declaring that academics, teachers, social workers, engineers, managers, nurses, and Netflix writers are not real workers, apparently. A strange take, which is made double strange by the fact that he would lump in teachers and social workers, who make pretty shit pay relative to engineers and Netflix executives altogether like this, but I digress. Ironic as it is coming from a guy who subsists from streamer donations and isn't formally employed as far as I know, let's set the hypocrisy aside and focus on the substance, and see what the experts have to say about this. Quote, what is the proletariat? The proletariat is that class in society which lives entirely from the sale of its labor and does not draw profit from any kind of capital. Those who wheel and woe, whose life and death, whose sole existence depends on the demand for labor. Hence on the changing state of business, on the vagaries of unbridled competition. The proletariat, or the class of proletarians, is, in a word, the working class of the 19th century, unquote. Frederick Engels, Principles of Communism. Quote, in proportion as the bourgeoisie, i.e. capital, is developed, in the same proportion is the proletariat, the modern working class, developed. A class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves as piecemeal, are a commodity, unquote. Marx, Communist Manifesto, page 18. The major advantage that Marxist analysis has over liberal analysis with respect to class dynamics is that we Marxists define class not by income level or occupation, but by one's relationship to the means of production. Do academics, teachers, social workers, engineers, managers, nurses, and TV show writers own capital? Do they exchange their labor time for a wage so that they must subsist? Unless the professional service workers of the note are also self-employed, own a business, or a number of shares in the stock market, or collect rent for a use value that they own, then the answer is no. They're just workers. Otherwise, even then, they would merely be petty proprietors. A capitalist, a full-fledged member of the bourgeoisie, is somebody who subsists solely through exploitation, i.e. wage labor, rent, dividends, royalties, and so on. Again, do teachers and engineers subsist through exploitation? Not inherently. The vast majority of the time they subsist through exchanging their labor power for a wage. The reason why teachers, doctors, and engineers tend to have higher salaries than manual laborers is because of the cost of education needed to train these technical high-skilled workers. Education under capitalism is treated as an investment, and a specialized skill set that only elite individuals have proprietary training in, and mental labor, like everything else, is a commodity. This is a point which is lost on the likes of some third worldists, as they apparently believe that first world workers are net exploiters because of outsourcing. A preposterous position for a whole slew of reasons that I dare not discuss, as they are outside the scope of this video. But let's be charitable for a moment. Perhaps what he meant to say is that professionals and service workers are performing unproductive labor, and it is for this reason they don't count as workers. As though only those employed in manufacturing, construction, and agriculture who produce a product rather than a service are the only ones who count as real workers. This sect of the working class, sometimes referred to as a professional managerial class, or PMC, are really more akin to petty bourgeois or labor aristocrats due to their high wages and unproductive labor. The topic of PMC, labor aristocracy in the middle class, warrants a video of its own. So for now, let's prioritize this question of productive and unproductive labor. The following is a series of passages from Karl Marx's Economic Works of 1864, or his draft for Chapter 6 of Das Kapital, in which he explains what productive and unproductive labor are within the context of capitalism and what classifies them as such. Since the direct purpose and the actual product of capitalist production is surplus value, only such labor is productive, and only such an exerter of labor capacity is a productive worker, as directly produces surplus value. Hence why such labor is productive as is consumed directly in the production process for the purpose of valorizing capital. Such labor is productive as directly valorizes capital, or produces surplus value, hence is realized, without any equivalent for the workers, for the performer of the labor, in a surplus value expressed in a surplus produce, hence in an excess increment of commodities for the monopolizer of the means of labor, for the capitalist, Only such labor is productive as posits the variable capital, and therefore the total capital as C plus delta C equals C plus delta V. It is therefore labor which directly serves capital as the agency of its self-valorization, as a means to the production of surplus value. Every productive worker is a wage laborer, but this does not mean that every wage laborer is a productive worker. In all cases where labor is bought in order to be consumed as use value, as a service, and not in order to replace the value of the variable capital as a living factor to be incorporated into the capitalist production process, this labor is not productive labor, and the wage laborer is not a productive worker. His labor is then consumed on account of its use value, not as positing exchange value. It is consumed unproductively, not productively. The capitalist therefore does not confront labor as a capitalist, as a representative of capital. He exchanges his money for labor as income, not as capital. The consumption of the labor does not constitute MCM bar, but CMC. The last symbol represents the labor, or the service itself. Money functions here only as a means of circulation, not as capital. The capitalist production process is not merely a process of production of commodities, it is a process which absorbs unpaid labor, making the means of production into means for the absorption of unpaid labor. It emerges from what has been said so far that to be productive labor is a quality of labor which in and for itself has absolutely nothing to do with the particular content of the labor, or the specific use value in which it is expressed. Labor, with the same content, can therefore be both productive and unproductive. Milton, for example, who did Paradise Lost, was an unproductive worker. In contrast to this, the writer who delivers hack work for his publisher is a productive worker. Milton produced Paradise Lost in a way that a silkworm produces silk, as the expression of his own nature. A singer who sings like a bird is an unproductive worker. If she sells her singing for money, then she is to that extent a wage laborer or a commodity dealer. But the same singer, when engaged by an entrepreneur who has her sing in order to make money, is a productive worker, for she directly produces capital. A schoolmaster who educates others is not a productive worker, but a schoolmaster who is engaged as a wage laborer in an institution along with others, in order through his labor to valorize the money of the entrepreneur of the knowledge-mongering institution, is a productive worker. The commodities the capitalist buys for his private consumption are not consumed productively. They do not become factors of capital, just as little do the services he buys for his consumption, voluntarily or through compulsion, from the state, etc., for the sake of their use value. They do not become factors of capital. They are therefore not productive kinds of labor, and those who perform them are not productive workers. Marx, 1864, Economic Manuscripts, Chapter 2, Productive and Unproductive Labor. Use values and commodities do not just constitute raw materials and physical products. They are also comprised of services performed by people as well. What gives goods and services value is the average quantities of abstract human labor time imbued within them, and whether or not the given form of labor can be called productive or unproductive depends on whether or not the labor performed contributes to the generation of surplus value, which is profit. Profit is the value realized or returns on investment above and beyond the reproduction cost of constant capital C plus variable capital V. Whenever labor power is being purchased as variable capital, that is, a commodity which is used to reproduce other commodities for sale on the market, that labor is productive. In other words, when the circuit is as such, MCM bar, where M is capital investment, C is the commodity, and M bar is return on investment. Conversely, labor is unproductive when it is being purchased independently as the use value in and of itself, in which case no surplus value is generated, and the circuit is instead CMC, where C is the individual's labor power, M is the money, and C is the service provided for that money. Independent, self-employed artisans and handicraft merchants who make and sell their own goods do not generate surplus value, and are therefore not productive workers. Police, security guards, maintenance technicians, advertisers, mailmen, managers, IT consultants, self-employed freelance professionals, and government agents are not considered productive workers for the same reason, because they don't generate a surplus, and on top of that, are subsidized by the productive, aka profit-generating sex of the economy. This does not mean that they don't provide use values or serve an important social function of some kind. It just means that the work that they do doesn't generate surplus value inherently. Just as good old Daddy Marx said a moment ago, labor of the same contents can either be productive or unproductive depending on whether or not the labor is being purchased as a use value or it is being purchased in pursuit of exchange value. An independent contractor, say a freelance drywall worker who exchanges his service to a customer for upfront payment, is not a productive worker. Conversely, if the same customer purchases drywall services from a drywall worker working underneath a construction company, that labor becomes productive. So to recap, Jackson is absolutely wrong when he goes on Twitter and declares that, quote, academics, teachers, social workers, engineers, managers, nurses, and Netflix writers are not real workers. Anybody who has to sell their labor power for a wage in order to survive is a worker, regardless of how little or how much their annual salary is. Those who own capital, on the other hand, that is, those who subsist through exploitation of wage laborers, is a capitalist, and those who subsist through a combination of wage work and exploitation are known as the petty bourgeoisie. So not only is he wrong on the first point, even if he is speaking from the point of view that service work isn't real work and that the only productive workers are construction, factory, and agricultural workers, a notion which is equally as ignorant and asinine as the former, most of the professions that he names can absolutely be considered productive for the aforementioned reasons. Services are freely reproducible commodities just as physical material goods are, and as we have already established, by the Marxist definition, any work which directly contributes to the generation of surplus value is by definition productive work. Be it a doctor who works under a private practice, be it a team of engineers on Elon Musk's payroll designing stupid-looking cars, be it an adjunct professor teaching debt-shackled students at an institution of higher learning, etc. And even if it were true that only the material good-producing professions such as manufacturing and agriculture are the only forms of productive labor, that doesn't change the fact that the professions of note all serve important social functions in one form or another as well. We need teachers, we need engineers, and we need social workers just as much as we need machinists, farmers, and carpenters. And if the next argument being posed is that they aren't real workers because they, quote, make too much, again, class is defined by one's relationship to the means of production, not by income level or profession. And even then, why lump teachers and social workers in with professional engineers? Most teachers, nurses, managers, and social workers that I know in real life barely have a dime to their name and live paycheck to paycheck. In today's economy, an average annual salary of $35 to $50K per year is barely enough to get by on if one is trying to keep up with a mortgage, a car payments, internet and phone bills, car insurance, gas and electric bills, property taxes, income taxes, and taking care of children. The last expense of which, mind you, costs an average of $230,000 over the course of an 18-year time period per child. And just like that, I have lost the last bit of respect that I have for Jackson Hinkle. Not that my respect wasn't wavering in the first place in the wake of his derogatory misogynistic comments towards women, or his apparent man-crush for Dangest Bosch, or any of the other ignorant takes that he has made in recent months. I shall now finish this video with some final advice for our dear Mr. Jackson Hinkle. I'm speaking directly to you. Why don't you stay in your lane and know your place like the rest of them, and stick to streaming and collecting donations? Leave the Marxism to the Marxists, and don't pretend to be an expert on subjects that you're clearly uneducated on. But of course, what am I thinking? There's money to be made in generating controversy and emotionally manipulating people on the internet, but that is analysis I shall save for another video. For now, I bid you all good day.